So here we are with episode 69.
We are both really tired people, so we'll see how short this one gets. I know the last one was
Yeah,
short, but
I know you mentioned you've had 4 hours sleep. I've got no such
mhm.
excuse. For some reason, I'm really tired and I've had quite a bit of sleep, I think. So anyway, that's all right. So I've only just got a couple of items. One is just a really quick one regarding an article I saw in USA Today. I just thought it was very strange, so I just made a note. So the heading of the article is "Men are skipping college. Here's why that trend could have devastating consequences." Now, that's probably quite a discussion. I actually do want to talk about education, university education. I think maybe next time might be a good one to do that actually.
Mhm.
I have somewhat of a different view than a lot of people. I'm not especially concerned about men not going to university for a variety of
Mhm.
reasons. Uh, while it is true that men are being subject to discrimination at university, what I think is actually happening to a large degree is that university degrees have become a lot less valuable. I think that men tend to be more nimble than women in regards to making these sort of choices. And this is partly because women are a lot more consensus based, something the feminists
Mhm.
themselves will often say. And because of that, the women are tending to do what other women are doing, right? Whereas the men are tending to make more of an individualistic choice.
Yeah.
And my belief is that because of the relatively high cost of education, university education, the fact that they're not getting as much out of it, I think a lot of men are choosing alternatives. So obviously there are problems with discrimination against men and so forth, and also the grading in high school, which is impacting it. But
Mhm.
even that's not always what it seems. I think yeah, probably this would be a really good topic for next time, actually. But I just wanted to say that yeah, I don't think that I'm not as concerned with men not going to
Mhm.
university as a lot of people are, even a lot of MRAs. So, but I think well, let's talk next time about education, about the university, and also too about high school and why boys aren't doing as badly as it sometimes first seems. But anyway, we can get to that.
Okay.
Um, so, but on that topic, I just wanted to mention, I just thought this was kind of cute. So I said that the title again is Men Are Skipping College. Here's why that trend could have devastating consequences. So they're arguing that the fact that men are not enrolling in university could have ultimately harmful to the society. And that could be true to some extent. If for example, you didn't have enough men going into medicine, because men tend to work longer hours and for more years. And this is particularly true with medicine, as I understand it. It's one of the areas where women go a lot of women work part time versus men who work full time. Men obviously are more likely to become specialists and so forth. So there is probably some validity in that argument, although I don't think the effect is as great as they're arguing, perhaps. But again, that's not actually what I wanted to comment on. This is a quote from the USA Today article. Um, so they're just, I'll just jump into the middle of the conversation, but it says, instead, it's attributed to the fact that women have no choice but to go to college to access opportunities men already have. So I'll say that again. Instead, it's attributed to the fact that women have no choice but to go to college to access opportunity men already have. That struck me as a very strange statement because they're essentially saying that men have some sort of are granted some sort of ability
Uh,
to I don't know work in particular fields or something, and they don't have to study for it. Apparently, very strange sentence. So I would love to ask
yeah.
someone at USA Today what they meant by that. Could they give an example of an opportunity that men gain without going to college that women require college?
Mhm.
So, which doesn't negate what I said earlier, but they're specifically saying there are things that men don't have to go to university for that women do. And I would, if they could give me a single example of that, I would really
Mhm.
love to hear it. Anyway,
Okay, it's badly phrased anyway. It's kind of confusing. It's like what's the part that men already have? The fact that they've already have no choice, or or do they have every choice in the world, and that's why the consequences are disastrous. So I'm not understanding the point they're trying to make off that sentence alone. I know I kind of know what they are, but it's just I'm kind of dumbfounded by the strange phrasing there. It's almost
yes,
like you're
exactly.
not.
Seems to be based on some sort of belief that the patriarchy sort of opens doors for men automatically, which of course
Yeah.
to the I mean I reject the position
Mhm.
of the patriarchy entirely as I've explained extensively in my writings. But
Yeah.
nevertheless, the idea that men are sort of gaining some sort of advantage in society in this manner is just absurd.
Hmm.
Uh, and demonstrably false in in modern society. And I have to admit too, lately I've been seeing, I mean, I always have for many, many years, but I'm still seeing a lot of people buying into, for example, the feminist historical narrative and even some belief in the patriarchy and so forth. And it makes me a little sad actually, because it's so obviously false. So at this point, 10 years ago, I would have cut some people some more slack over it. Maybe we hadn't made the case as well and it wasn't quite as clear, but it is now. It is. And it's just, it's actually, I kind of find it sad that people are still buying
Yeah.
into it.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyway,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, I just thought that was a funny line. Apparently, there's some sort of just by being a man, you get your patriarchy card or something, and you swipe it, and the door opens. I don't know.
Exactly. Well, I mean, I think the one thing that they're anticipating is like the big disaster here is that men are not sinking a ton of money into the system and getting their student loans and being in debt and so forth. So
Exactly.
yeah, I'm sure that's the only practical disaster I'm actually seeing right now, and I
It's
don't
got.
really mind that happening either.
That's right. It's got them really worried. That's right. That's right. So, the great man of history, a great man of
Hmm.
history, is Ludwig von Mises.
Yep.
So he was an interesting character, actually. So I'll just look up his. See if
Hmm.
I was going to write down his years of birth on my notes here, but anyway. So okay, 1881 to 1973 to give you a bit of a context there. So he obviously was, as an adult in the, he would have been 1920 at the turn of the 20th century. He fought in the First World War. He was actually drafted. He was actually anti-war, but he was drafted into the military of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, one of the empires, of course, that's now in the graveyard of history as a result of having fallen apart following World War One. So there were several empires that decided that they wanted to get involved in World War One, and that was the end of them. So the German Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, all gone as a result of their involvement. Anyway, just a little bit of background about him, first of all. But he had Jewish heritage, and so he was German, but he fled Nazi Germany to Switzerland, but later moved to the US because apparently he was even quite concerned about Switzerland and whether Switzerland might be invaded by the Nazis. And he was right to flee, it turns out. He was already fairly well known as an economist and so forth at this point. But he was right to flee because apparently the day of the Anschluss, which of course is when Austria got annexed into Nazi Germany, uh, they raided his apartment in Vienna. So because obviously once the Anschluss happened, Austria was part of Nazi Germany, and so that German law applied. And they actually raided his apartment that day, and his papers apparently were seized, and they were thought lost for a long time. But they actually turned up in the Soviet Union decades later. So which is great that they're able to have survived. Anyway, yeah, he was a great defender of classical liberalism.
Yes.
And yes, and there was and I know Vernon, I know you were reading a bit about him as well. And there's an area called praxeology, which
Yes.
he didn't originate, but he
Yeah.
was one
Yeah.
of the main proponents. Yeah, he was one of the main proponents, and I think he helped sort of expand the understanding. Essentially, I mean, my understanding of the definition is that essentially it's the philosophical view that humans act deliberately, in the
Yes.
sense that we
Right.
make choices rather than reacting to
Right.
events. Yeah, which
It,
is
it
an
was
alternative
an
view.
attempt at the science of human behavior and like what
Yeah,
motivates them and so forth. And that's something that actually kind of factors into the idea of the free market that he was defending. Of course, why people make these choices, why they make the trades they do, and why they interact, which it's the sort of thing that if you don't stand or even try to ignore it, you'll try to smuggle in things that he was against, like socialism and so forth.
mm,
So
mm. Exactly, exactly. Excuse me. In particular, he postulated that socialism essentially will always fail, and he presented, I think, what I think may have been a unique argument is that I think he was the first one to postulate this idea.
mhm.
His argument essentially was that the centrally planned essentially, first of all, capitalism is very dynamic. Uh, every individual is an actor, and making choices in the market and so forth. Uh, but and of course, obviously, people have an incomplete view of the market in some cases, so they may make incorrect decisions. They can only go on based on
Mhm.
the information they've got and so forth. But it is still very dynamic. And the argument is that ultimately it will advance make improvements far more often than causes problems. So,
Right.
but he argued that that socialism essentially being centrally planned can't. There just aren't enough bureaucrats, and they can't respond quickly enough to be dynamic or to be as effective as the dynamic capitalism is. So
Mhm.
yeah, essentially he argued on this basis that it would always fail. And as far as I know, I think he was the first one to make this particular argument, essentially
Mhm.
making, I guess, almost a structural argument about it and saying that the very nature, the very structure of socialism is such that it will ultimately fail.
Right. Yeah.
And when reading about this, I was reminded of Lenin. I have mentioned this before, but it's worth mentioning again. Lenin came up with something called the New Economic Policy in the early 1920s, and it was none other than limited capitalism in the Soviet Union in order because there was a famine going on, and he didn't believe that the centrally planned economy could get them out of it, and he
Mhm.
introduced limited capitalism into the Soviet Union, which worked and staved off famine. And Stalin got rid of it, and
Mhm.
not long afterwards there was a famine. So I'm, I don't, I personally haven't, decisively confirmed that Stalin getting rid of the new economic policy was the cause of the famine. However, the two do correlate quite closely together. One follows the other. So
Right.
the famine follows the abolition of the new economic policy, and the new economic policy was specifically intended to stave off famine. So I do believe there's probably something in that.
Mhm.
But anyway, just the point is that I want to make that even Lenin thought that capitalism was the correct way of staving off
Well,
famine.
let's make no mistake here. Lenin was insidious, right? Being
Oh
a
yes,
communist, right? But
yes,
the thing is, the more insidious he is, he knows what does contribute to prosperity
yes.
and what doesn't, and he knows enough to kind of limit it just enough to maintain his rule, but
Yes.
smuggle it in just enough to make it survive. In fact. It could be argued that any given communistic nation in the world or any kind of tyrannical nation that doesn't thrive on the free market has to have some kind of vestige of a free market in there to keep its own life support going on. And the more that is smuggled in, the more prosperous it might look. And then that they kind of take the credit and say, see, communism is just fine. But I think China is like a gigantic example of this.
I was just going to say, China, I think, is possibly
Mhm,
the perfect example of that, exactly,
mhm,
where you've still got the
yeah,
Chinese Communist Party running the place.
mhm,
But the reality is it's a capitalist economy to a large degree now and has been for
mhm,
a long
yeah,
time. By the
absolutely.
way, as an aside, yeah, we're getting away
Mhm,
from Ludwig there a little bit, but as an
sure.
aside, there's a movie that was done in the United States in the 1970s called Americathon, and
Mhm,
if you it's probably a bit corny. In fact, it's very corny in places, but it was set in the it was written rather after the 1973 oil shock and so forth, and a lot of the jokes in the movie about they have people living in cars because they have no oil, so they
mhm,
can't move the cars. The
yeah,
premise is it's set, I think, in the early 21st century, done in the 1970s. And the idea is that the United States is out of money and they're going to have a telethon to raise money because in fact,
oh, yeah.
actually, Native Americans actually foreclosing on the United States. So that's sort of the joke that, he's going to foreclose and take over again. But one of the things that it's quite famous for, the movie, is that it made a number of predictions which ended up coming true. One of them was that China is capitalist. In the Americathon society of the 21st century, China is a completely capitalist society. And anyway, yeah. So there's a number of others as well where they got quite close or got really right. So anyway, I just thought I'd mention Americathon. One of my favorite movies when I was a kid. I watched it again recently. It's probably pretty corny, but it's worth watching, especially as if we're watching out for the things that they got right and the things that they got wrong. So anyway,
Exactly.
yeah. But yeah, so back to Ludwig. Anyway, yeah, so he was a supporter of what a major figure in classical liberalism, which of course I regard myself. as a classical liberal. Classical liberalism is really about things like the rule of law and individual rights and responsibilities and taking responsibility for one's actions in that regard and so forth. So,
And
um,
emphasis on the freedom of taking those responsibilities.
exactly, that's
Yeah.
right. You're having the freedom, but also then taking the responsibility for whatever choices you made. Exactly, that's right. And I do see some people uh, making general references to liberalism and so forth
Hmm.
as being critical of it. Conservatives might do that. I see quite a lot of that,
Yeah.
conservatives criticizing liberalism. But I think it's important to remember that liberalism is quite large, as indeed
Hmm.
conservatism is as well.
Right.
There are people like me who are classical liberals who, in today's world, are probably pretty centrist. Actually, I would have regarded myself as centre left for a long time,
Hmm.
but I think that the middle ground has moved under me. As I said,
Yeah.
I don't identify in the left-right paradigm anymore,
Right. Yeah.
but I did once would have once called myself centre left. But as a classical liberal, yeah, I'd say it's probably pretty much dead centre now, actually.
Mm.
Anyway, yeah, just I thought I'd mention that too. That remember, liberalism is quite large, and that does include classical liberalism, which is quite different to progressivism, which
Oh,
might be
yes. Yeah.
some people would call social liberalism, which is yeah,
Yeah. Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
So,
anyway,
yeah.
Yeah, Ludwig von Mises. Interesting character. It's kind of surprising that I haven't actually run across him until quite relatively recently. So I'm pleased that I've had an opportunity to do some research on him. Um, and yeah, so as I said, interesting that the argument that he put forward regarding the nature of socialism and that ultimately it will fail because um, I think that's certainly been the conclusion I've drawn that over my life in terms of watching socialist societies. You know, when I was young, the Soviet Union still existed, right?
Hmm.
So there were still some functioning socialist societies, and I can kind of give people who were socialists then a bit more credit in the sense, and people who were socialists earlier, I can even give them more credit to. Like H.G. Wells, for example, was a socialist in the 1890s. There were quite a number of other prominent socialists in the 1890s. A lot of writers that you will have known about and so forth. They were
Well,
all members of something.
there's Orwell, and we in our men's movement have
Bax.
Bax. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly, that's right. They were all members. Well, I don't know who Orwell was. I'd have to check. But H.G. Wells and Bax were both members of the Fabian Society, which still exists, by the way. So
Yeah.
that's
I'm familiar with the Fabian Society. Yeah.
yeah, it's essentially a social, as I understand it, a socialist society uh, in um, in the UK. But as I said, like many of the famous figures from the late 19th century that you would have read about and you would have read their books um, were members. By the way, we both said Bax before. It's E. Belford Bax is who we were
Yeah.
talking about. For those who don't know, so just thought I'd mention it. Um, but uh, I give those people. So some people I know in men's rights were a bit shocked to learn that Bax was a socialist. They went a bit off him
Hmm.
over that. But I give people in the 19th century a bit of a pass on that actually, because socialism hadn't really yet had an opportunity to really demonstrate how woefully terrible it is.
Hmm.
Uh, and as a result, I do give late 19th century socialists a bit of a pass. And the longer you go on, the less of a pass I'm inclined to give them. So up into about the 1920s, I'm prepared to sort of
Hmm.
accept that. Hell, even one of my own relatives, Fenner Brockway, Archibald Fenner Brockway, who was a major figure in the anti-nuclear movement and so forth. He was also a socialist and a member of the Fabian Society. So
Right.
pretty much, if you've ever read about a major 19th century figure who's British, and they've written a novel or they've done some great work or something, chances are they're in the Fabian Society. So there were a lot of these socialists, but as I said, I do give them a pass, Fenner Brockway. I wonder if he was alive today. He died in '88, I think. Yeah, I wonder if he was alive today, what sort of views he would have, because yeah, as I said, he was a lifelong socialist, but it was a different time when his ideas were formed. So yeah. Um, but anyway, so getting back to yeah, um, I I do think that socialism, particularly since the end of World War II, has demonstrated very, very serious flaws. The Soviet Union functioned, to some extent for many, many decades, and of course ran out of steam. It was really, some people argue as early as 1982 the Soviet Union was in trouble, but it wasn't obviously until later in the decade. I think what 1990 the Soviet Union fell, but what 87 the Berlin Wall fell. Um, but it of course is a nation with vast resources, right? And all the other socialist nations with much less resources have struggled along. And yes, there are say what some people like it may counter with, oh, there are democratic socialist nations, for example, most of Scandinavia, and they're actually doing quite well, right? But really, what they really have is a form of constrained capitalism with a strong welfare state. I would even argue most Western countries aren't really, well, they're not pure capitalists at all. We constrain capitalism quite a bit, right? The US less than other countries probably, but
Yeah,
here in
well,
Australia,
yeah,
in Canada, yeah, here in Australia and Canada, capitalism is constrained quite a bit. Obviously, the Nordic countries even more, right?
right.
Um, but I don't count the Nordic countries as socialist in any realistic sense. They have a strong welfare state, and there are other reasons why they function so well as they do. They have a very cohesive society and so forth,
Mhm,
and everyone's pretty
right.
much on the same page.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
I'll go.
No, that's fine. This idea of implementing capitalism is actually kind of a very strange thing because
Hmm,
if you really think about it, assuming that capitalism in the true spirit of what we're trying to talk about here is just free trade and free interaction, voluntarism, and the profiting of both sides in any given transaction. It's not an implementation as much as not as de-implementing like bad constraints and restrictions and
not
so forth. It's
constraining
it's
it.
a it's a like freeing
That's it.
up, and that's what capitalism is. So whenever let's say some like socialists or other kind of people who are trying to criticize the state of capitalism today by introducing a mixed economy or whatever, which it kind of reeks of their lack of understanding or the deliberate obfuscation of what capitalism actually is. Like it's something that comes in one fell swoop and let the
Mm.
corporatists take over or something like that, which is not the case. It's more people interacting kind of outside of that kind of those restrictions, if
That
that makes
that's
sense.
yeah, that's actually a really good point because if you have an environment where essentially there's a free for all insofar as people are free to trade as they wish, then yes, you could argue that capitalism will naturally arise in that environment because you can just exchange based on an agreement. Obviously, there are going to be disagreements and so forth, and you need a legal system to deal with those or some way of dealing with those.
Right.
But yeah, but as long as you can, in a lot of cases, in most cases, humans will actually try to interact with each other based on some sort of agreement, particularly in say ancient times, it would have been quite dangerous not to. You could potentially find yourself in trouble if you didn't.
Right.
So in terms of under threat and so forth. So you humans will naturally, generally try to engage in a manner which will not cause too many problems with other people because there's potentially risk for themselves as well if they do. So
Right.
in that environment, yes, you would find that you would have humans just interacting. That's actually quite interesting. Actually, I mean, a lot of ancient societies were what they call gift economies, but I don't doubt that barter went on, and once money was invented, obviously,
Mhm.
you had to exchange with money as well. But that could easily have gone on at the same time as the gift economy, I think.
Right.
Hmm. So anyway, I think Ludwig von Mises, an interesting figure, as I said, and encourage everybody to look a little bit more at him. Um, I had kind of unintentionally gone back to a German, so I was trying to say I was going to stay away from Germans a little bit, but he was such an interesting character. So um, but here we are. I've talked about another German. So
Right. Yeah.
yep. And anyway, so I've got Zoe McClellan to talk about. I actually don't have anything else tonight. It is rather short.
Okay. Well,
We even,
let's at least smuggle one more thing in.
all
Since
right.
we're talking about Von Mises, so his not his website, but the not Austrian economic school of thought has um a website, Mises.org, is
Yeah,
basically his, yeah. Um, we talk about AI a lot, and and I follow Mises.org, and they posted a article talking about AI. Uh, does AI lead to socialism? Now, obviously, they formed a critical of socialism stance, obviously, but
mm,
just there's some mirroring in the article about what we kind of talk about, which is essentially
mm,
Luddite fallacy.
yeah,
After I've read it, I don't think it uses the term Luddite fallacy by name, but I think it makes the same case that those that argue that AI will destroy jobs and so forth, and will eventually lead to a socialist sort of a takeover is unfounded. Is basically the idea of what the article is trying to say. And an important thing to note here is that, and I'm quoting from the article here, the only purpose of an economy is to create goods and services that satisfy human wants, not to create jobs. So,
mhm,
so that's a very
mm,
important point that it
mm.
makes because everybody
Jobs,
like talk about
like,
creating jobs and so
yes,
forth. But
it's a
you
really
know,
good point. Jobs are created as a consequence of it, not as the
mhm.
requirement, as not as the aim. That's right.
Exactly, yeah.
Yes.
And continuing that paragraph, if AI eliminates jobs in the sense we now understand it, other opportunities will emerge for value creation as they have before when new technologies upset the status quo. Human wants are unlimited, and theory and history have shown that a market free from state intervention is the best way to satisfy them.
Yeah.
So basically, kind of shutting down that whole thing that AI is going to lead to this dystopian kind of a situation.
You're right. It's a Luddite fallacy without saying the Luddite fallacy. Exactly. That's right.
Hmm. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It doesn't use that term by name, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
There's that's right. We both talked about this in previous episodes, and I think we've made our positions on it clear. That's right. Essentially that yeah, that's right. Jobs will AI may destroy certain jobs, but other jobs will be created. And of
right,
course
yeah.
then there's opportunities for retraining and so forth.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, it is like, in a weird way, things like technology perpetuation, like the advancement of technology and AI being the latest sort of iteration of it, is sort of it is actually kind of an expression of the market because we want things to be more automated. We're getting them. We're devising them due to our own initiatives. And we're weeding out some of the inefficiencies. If we're talking about, the destruction of certain kinds of jobs, like so certain inefficient jobs get eliminated, so that better jobs could take its place. So
mm.
I'm not seeing the dystopian aspect here. It's kind of more, what I mean. There's bad ways AI can be used. So that's kind of on us to kind of see which ones work and which ones don't. But
As can any
on
technology, indeed. That's right.
mhm, yeah, exactly.
Mm. Yeah, so I believe that there will probably be. So, okay, first of all, there's an argument that's been put forward only relatively recently, I believe, that the job creation is to a large extent a function of the complexity of society. So this argument posits that, and what I find compelling about this argument is that it seems to actually fit and explain the last few decades.
Hmm.
It proposes that as society gets more complex, which our society is getting more complex, there will actually be more different jobs and even that people will be working more. And one of the interesting things about the last century is that there have been predictions for at least a century, separate from the Luddite fallacy, there have been predictions for at least a century that essentially technology will alleviate human labor, people will have to work less, and everyone will have a lot more leisure time. And that, by and large, has not actually been the case, right? So we work at least as much as
Yeah.
people did 100 years ago. And admittedly, I mean, there are there were factory workers who were working very long hours and so forth, but nevertheless, accounting for our days off. So I'll probably want to clarify that statement a little bit, because there were people working long hours in factories and so forth. But
Yeah, right.
nevertheless, yeah. But I'll get to that. I'll get to another historical
Mhm.
period in a minute. But nevertheless, we do work quite long hours. We had to have essentially a 40-hour week imposed. There's been governments track overtime, and for a long time, overtrack was actually ticking up. I believe it may have turned around now and be moving. This paid and unpaid overtime, by the way. I believe it in the last few years it might have dropped a little bit, but for decades it was actually moving up versus moving down. So people were working more during that period. So I do want to clarify that I'll put in a caveat for my statement that obviously there were labour reforms in the early 20th century and that cut down hours a lot, right? And I know there's places like France that have 35-hour weeks. They're now talking about releasing people to work, allowing people to work more actually, because the 35-hour week is causing is a problem. But I want to give you a couple of other examples. And feel free to jump in there anytime,
Yeah,
Vernon, if
yeah,
you.
yeah. Of
But
course.
in the Middle Ages, it is believed that people who worked in a manor typically worked about 4 hours a day, because essentially, if you worked in the manor, it was very prestigious to have lots of staff if you were an
Hmm.
aristocrat. So they
Yeah.
would oversupply their manors. And as a result, there wasn't enough work to go around for full time. And they think that most people who worked in the manor only worked about 4 hours a day. During medieval Europe, and I know more about medieval Europe here than other parts of the world, but in medieval Europe, obviously, you're thinking of backbreaking labor in the fields, and don't get me wrong, that was backbreaking labor in the fields. It was really hard work.
Of course.
But Europe actually had a surprising number of holy days. Some people have contended, and I'm not going to go this far, but some people have contended that Europeans were off nearly half the time. That there were so many holy days that they were off nearly one day in two. I've
Right.
heard some other historians come back and said, no, it wasn't quite that much. But nevertheless, there were a lot of holy days. So even though, you didn't go on vacation for 4 weeks or whatever, that's not how it worked. And you didn't jump on a plane and go somewhere else. You were staying in your area, but nevertheless, there were a lot of rest days when people would have got up late, gone to church, had a game of football. That was really common, for example, in England. 1,000 years ago, people would play football in the afternoon after they'd gone to church on their holy day in the morning, and generally just have an easy day, go to work, and
Yeah.
maybe you work for a few days afterwards, right?
Hmm.
But there were a lot of rest days, holy
Hmm.
days. Another example, hunter gatherers, right? Even today, hunter gatherers only work a few hours a day. And hunter gatherers today live on the worst land because we in industrialized and agricultural societies have pushed them out to the worst land.
Yeah.
You rewind the clock 20,000 years and everybody was a hunter gatherer. The hunter gatherers were living on the best land, right? Some of the tribes that were living in the northwestern United States and southwestern Canada, apparently the environments that they were living in were so plentiful that they could virtually walk outside their front door and find food. It was,
Hmm.
so you wouldn't even have to go looking for it. But hunter-gatherers, despite, and this is another thing you'll see in a lot of my writing and so forth, it really wasn't that bad being a hunter-gatherer. Yes, you lived about 20 years less than we live, right? And obviously didn't have all the modern conveniences we've gotten. And so there are obviously advantages of today, but it wasn't that bad being a hunter-gatherer. And they certainly didn't live the short, brutish lives that some Europeans had suggested in the 19th. That's where that all comes from, by the way. 19th century Europe was essentially the ones who pushed out this idea that being a hunter-gatherer was just terrible. But to a large degree, it wasn't. Anyway, this all ties into some stuff I've got in my book, The Victorian Fallacy, that I'm still writing,
Yeah.
where I talk about the development of agriculture and so forth. But the point I'm getting at is whether you're looking at people who worked in medieval Europe, people who were hunter-gatherers and so forth, a lot of them, well, they were working, particularly the agriculturalists, were working hard, but they had a lot of time off as well. So, and also, too, the other thing about agriculture, is you don't have to plow all the time. People think of plowing, right? But you actually only plow once a year, right, for a period of time. And then you don't plow the rest of the time because you're waiting for your food to grow. So uh, there would have been, there's obviously a lot of hard work in there, but there are other periods of time where things aren't so bad, and there are the holidays I mentioned. So, but we work today quite long hours, and there's even an argument that we undergo a lot more stress than people did perhaps historically. We have a lot of deadlines in our work and so
Yeah.
forth. People historically, they had deadlines of a sort too. The agriculturalists had to get the ploughing done by a certain date, but they were talking days or weeks out in a lot of cases, and they had time to plan. And there would have been we have a lot of a lot of particularly a lot of white collar workers will have unexpected changes in their priorities, move from one
Mm.
project to another. It's very common, that sort of thing. That sort of thing can cause stress versus an agriculturalist where, unless a war was starting, there's probably not
Mhm.
going to be much changing in your environment. You know months in advance what's going to happen. So anyway, so yeah, things often weren't so bad as perhaps we would think. Personally, if I had my choice, I think today is a good time to be alive in many ways, although we know
Yeah,
we
of
have problems. But my
course.
second choice would actually be as hunter-gatherer.
Okay.
I think it wouldn't be bad when the world is young and there's all that exploring to do and really only had to work 4 hours a day and so forth. I think it would have been quite exciting in many ways, trying to figure everything out.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, yeah, right.
yeah, but the point I'm making is that, at least in terms of work, uh, work is not declining in the way that some people are predicting. As I
Right.
said, overtime had actually been going up. In fact, it took labour reforms like the 8 hour day, which, by the way, was first invented in Australia,
Mhm.
to limit work because essentially there was more work. The employers wanted to push people into more work, and there was work to be done, right?
Yeah.
So and nothing's going to change. People keep saying, "Oh, AI is different." Well, yeah, the cloud was supposed to be different, and the internet was supposed to be different, and
Hmm.
computers were supposed to be different as well. They're not different. They're all the same. They're all the
Hmm.
same. So we're not all going to be out of work. Yes, some
Yeah.
jobs will become superfluous. Other classes, other jobs, and as I've said on a previous episode, other classes of jobs will appear that nobody's even thought of. The one I mentioned in the previous episode, I believe, the one I always mention, search engine optimization. Who ever, even 30 years ago, who would have imagined would be a job that somebody would do?
Yeah.
Right before the web, or even just when the web first appeared.
Hmm.
Okay, and I was online at that time, right? The search engines were very, very basic, such as they were. They couldn't even some of them couldn't even be called search engines in the modern modern meaning, and certainly nothing. It wouldn't have occurred to anybody who tried to optimize. It wouldn't even make any sense. So to get rankings higher. So uh, who knows what jobs will exist in 10 or 20 years because of the rollout of AI into the workplace. I will make one call though. I think I predict over the next 100 years or so, a higher proportion of the population will be doing regulatory jobs. That's probably not a very bold claim because it's been the trend for several decades now. But I think that it will continue, and compliance and auditing and regulation will become more and more important in our complex society, and more humans will be called upon to do those jobs. So there'll be more and more people doing compliance jobs and other people cross-checking the compliance. And yes, using AI to do that as well, but there'll be a human involved. Oh, your audio has gone.
Oh, sorry about that.
There we go.
Okay, good. Yeah. Um, so there's a bit more work cut out when it comes to the AI thing too, because when we talk in the realm of artistry, we're still kind of going in a strange way because it's kind of similar to kind of believing that the computer can't make mistakes. Like back then, we had some problems with the earliest software and some of the bugs it fell into, kind of leading into uh, like deaths and so forth. I'm not talking about human deaths here right now, but but in as much that we still need to kind of look at the ethics of how AI operates in certain ways. Like we're talking about the use of already recorded or created material artistically that's
Yes.
online and so forth. So that's something I can understand the complaints of music, of the musician's angle when it comes to the AI, like especially with AI music generation. I thought about talking about it in detail because I got like 3 pages of notes here, but I probably won't in detail. Just maybe kind of go just talk a little bit about it. But um, it's because we have music generating AI tools, and people think they're making songs out of it. Hey, I made songs in just a few minutes, and so forth. But that's like a whole bit of a different subject, I think,
Mm.
because in several ways. Because on one side, it's very likely using uh, uh, the material that others have already um, used
Others,
and
others' creative works.
others' creative works. And
Mhm.
secondly, it's like, just because you've got a prompt and you've created like a piece of art or like a AI generated photo does not turn you into a artist
No.
or so forth. So that's a bit of a different subject. Maybe next time I'll talk about it because I got enough notes on it. I think we're both very fatigued right now,
I think
so
that's
I
a
don't.
good one for
Yeah,
next time. Yeah, because we had even
yeah.
debated whether we would talk about AI this time or next time.
Hmm.
But it sounds like we've got a couple of good topics. I'd like to talk about education. You'd like to talk about AI in
Hmm.
particular regard to music, that I think is a
Yes.
really good subject to discuss, actually.
Yeah.
Yes. But I think people are starting to get the idea now of watching a few of these episodes that what we think about this. Versus what the a lot perhaps the mainstream media is saying about
Hmm.
AI. I just want to make one final comment on AI. I think I
Yeah.
may have alluded to this in a previous episode too, but I just wanted to underline it. Um, AI has become very topical in the last 3 to 5 years. 5 years is probably even generous. A
Yeah.
lot of people would have barely heard of it until probably 2 or 3 years ago. Please don't mistake what's been going on. AI research has been going on for 50 to 60 years now. Okay, so what you're seeing is the end result of 50 to 60 years of effort, not 2 to 3 years of effort, which it may
Yeah.
appear to be the case.
Hmm.
And AI has been, by the way, there was an AI bubble in the 80s, by the way, just so everyone
Ooh.
knows. So this has happened
Yeah.
before anyway. And I even remember in the 80s, people talking about being able to tell a computer what you want and having it write a program for you. Oh, that sounds familiar. Anyway, but yeah, so people were talking about that 40 years ago. But
Yeah.
I just want to say about AI in regards to these 50 to 60 years of research it's now been going on. It has very much been 2 steps forward, 1 step back, maybe even,
Hmm.
3 steps forward, 2 steps back. It's taken a long time to get to generative AI. And I think I keep hearing people say things like they believe that next there's all sorts of problems with the artifacts and hallucinate out of what they call AI hallucinations, where it goes off and says stuff that's just
Yeah.
nonsense. Oh, that'll be fixed next year or the year after. When considering that, just remember this is the end result of 50 to 60 years of work, not 2 to 3. Okay. And they're hard problems to solve.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't think that AI, mean, AI is a tool, a useful tool, and I look forward to using it as a tool. As the internet itself is a tool, and many of the things we find online are tools.
Hmm.
It'll be a very useful tool, but it is just a tool. So,
Hmm.
yeah,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and
And we need to use it carefully. Yeah.
yeah, we do. And it will have
Yeah.
limitations for a long time to come. I
Hmm.
think it will actually kind of probably always have some sort of limitations.
Hmm.
Uh, but remember that it is not, although it may appear to be intelligent in some ways, it is not. It is merely
Hmm.
simulating intelligence.
Yes.
Uh, when do we ever get a sentient machine? I don't know. We don't really understand what causes
Hmm.
sentience yet. So
Right.
I think
Yeah.
it's an emergent behavior of some description, but exactly
Hmm.
what causes it is so therefore we don't know
Hmm.
when or if machines can exhibit it.
Hmm.
Anyway, sorry, yes, you go on.
Well, I've kind of hinted it here or there, like some guesses I might have as to sentience. Maybe make it have motives and maybe realize its own physical limitations, assuming it's placed in a physical body. We have a physical body, so that's why we kind of know what limits us and we know what motivates us from a biological standpoint. So sentience kind of finds itself there, I think, is something I've kind of hinted in the past. But to go back, what things like weapons are useful, and in some argument, it's sort of a good thing to have when you're trying to protect and do the right thing and so forth. But it can be abused and used for wrong
Mm,
things. And so I guess what we're trying to say here is that, AI is not in itself the harbinger of doom, but
mm.
we have to kind of watch people who use it for that purpose, I suppose, if that made sense. So,
Yes, exactly. That's right. That's right. And again, it will be like any tool that can be used for good or ill. That's true for, I'd say, pretty much any tool. Maybe there are exceptions, but
mhm,
pretty much any tool can be used for good or ill. Absolutely. Also, too, I did just want to mention one last comment in regards to an AI advancing to the point where it appears to be indistinguishable from a human. Some
mhm,
people have said, oh, maybe that computer could pass the Turing test and so forth, but um, I, and this is something I myself have pondered for decades. So I realized this when I was about 15, and that was rather a long time ago now, that you might eventually be able to construct an AI, which essentially was indistinguishable from a human, at least for a long period of time. And I proposed even then that you could essentially, they could get better and better. And, it may be very difficult to detect the difference, but it still isn't sentience, right? The work of the AI is ultimately derivative. It is entirely derived from its
yes.
data set, right?
Mhm,
It may produce interesting and unexpected results from the data set, and that's where some of its
mhm,
strength comes from, right? A lot of its strength
yeah,
actually, where it can find things in the data set that other tools may not be able to.
yeah,
But that is not the same thing as it inventing something.
right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in the random generation, it's kind of become part and parcel to AI when it comes to the visual generation of certain kind of things. In fact, like I don't know what's actually called, but like an AI nightmare is almost kind of its own genre of of generative art, I think, is my understanding of it. Yeah. But yeah, it's commenting on the fact that this has been a long time coming, decades and decades of this is kind of
Work.
work came to the AI. It's all continuously improving heuristics, right? And
Mm.
even heuristics itself is just kind of like a coding manner of how many what's the probability of it going this direction uh,
Yes.
and how many times do we go this way? There's so much randomization involved that if you really dig deep into it, it doesn't really resemble human behavior
Mm.
exactly. You're not you're kind of doing the opposite of approximating it. You're doing uh, you know, like you say, it's derivative. It's an imitation, basically, but not actually conducive to the real spirit of the matter.
And a big concern for mine is that they're not giving proper credit. I know as you do, if you do search through your ChatGPT now, I believe that it does start. It is now presenting, data related to the origin of the data, the sources that it's used. But
Mhm.
even so, it's not. I still don't think it's properly providing proper credit to the sources that it's using. It's possible, for example, I've done this quite a number of times. I've taken answers. I've asked ChatGPT or another AI something, and I've taken statements from the answer that I think we felt were fairly distinctive, put them back into a search engine, and found the original document that they came from. So the exact statement, right?
Right.
So, and I certainly encourage others to do that as well and try it out. And also to the other another aspect is that a lot of people don't realize is that although they have a very large data set, they actually do weight values in there so that they weight the tokens so that some sorts of answers will be more likely than other sorts of answers. And that's what leads to a lot of them being woke. It's not that there were in the original data set, it's that the researchers have actually tweaked it. So never forget too that the AI reflects the views, at least to some extent, of the researchers as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should never forget that, we're putting ourselves into this,
Mm,
and sometimes not willingly.
mm.
Um, but so, we're very much kind of involved in this, and and it's only going to be as good as those that put themselves into this thing. So, and that's true of any kind of technology. If we can get it through to our heads that technology is an extension of ourselves and not its replacers, or at least that's the ideal way to
Yes.
kind of look at this, then we can't afford to ignore the moral, ethical ramifications of any given thing we do with technology and AI. So I know we've been saying this many times over, but it bears repeating.
Yeah, computers and humans together are far more effective than either on their own.
Yeah.
Yep. Also, too, I did want to make one last point, and I can't recall if we
How
made
many
this
how
point.
many how many one
You're
last points
right.
have you made?
I know I've
I know,
made a lot of
I
one
no,
last
listen,
points
but
today, haven't I?
no,
That's right.
I like
Um,
that you're talking about it, but it's
yeah.
just comical. I just one last
Yes.
point, one last
Yeah,
point.
exactly. You're right.
Like,
That's right. I've made several one last points now. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, the AI of today is has used a large data set from the internet
Mhm.
of content produced by humans. And I might add too, I suspect that a little bit of it's quite old. The Grokeypedia article for A Voice for Men seems to me to be out of date. It's more balanced than some other
Uh,
articles, but it still seems to be out of date.
mhm.
It seems to be several years out of date, actually. So as if the data set that they'd used probably didn't include anything that was, say, more than 2 or 3 years old, 2 or 3 years
Mhm.
young, I should say.
Yeah,
So I could be wrong there, and that's not to criticise the article. Overall, I think the article is not bad, but better than a lot of other articles, like the Wikipedia
yeah.
article, for example. But
Mhm.
nevertheless, it does seem to be a bit out of date. Um, but that's not really the point I was making, though. The point I'm making, my last point, is that um, right now it's being fed with human data, right?
Mhm.
But since generative AI has become common, now we're seeing a lot of AI generated data being pumped out. Okay.
Mhm.
So, what happens in 10 or 20 years? What if the AIs can't distinguish between AI generated data and human generated data?
Mhm.
That means that a lot of AIs will be fed with AI generated data,
Yeah,
right? And you'll effectively have this sort of circular feed. You have a feedback loop going on,
yeah. Right.
um, and that's when you end up with the what they call well. That's one of the potential causes of AI hallucinations. Could AIs in 10 years be less effective than they are today? The ChatGPT or whatever its
Mhm.
equivalent is, version
Yeah.
17 or whatever exists in 10 years,
Mhm.
right? Could it be less effective than today because so much of its source data is actually AI generated versus human generated? Or will the researchers, I'm no doubt the researchers will try to filter that out, but will they be able to do so? I don't know. Uh, or are they just going to keep feeding it from old data from before AI started pumping lots of data out? So I don't know. I think that the future for AI is not nearly as rosy for a variety of reasons as is often said. Okay, that's
Right.
my final point.
Can I make a final
Sure,
point?
make your final point. I've
Okay.
made my final point.
Okay. Well, I'm reminded of the fact that we talked about preservation and recording like a couple of episodes back. And one problem we run into here is like making copies of any given media. And this kind of reminds me of it. It's like you're making an AI is making
Yes,
a copy of an AI, makes a copy of an AI.
yes, good
So there's kind
analogy.
of like a degeneration there.
Yep.
Uh, so yeah, I think we need to kind of do some kind of I don't know if this is the right analogy to make, but some janitorial work digitally, and kind of go back and do some cleanup and preservation, and reintroduce that human element periodically,
Mm.
and with some kind of regularity. I think that would be a good way to kind of look at things. I'm without inspiring any more lasts one last things from you. I next time I want to talk more about the artistic angle of
Yes.
AI because I've got
Yes.
pages of notes on this one. I really want to kind of
Yeah.
it's best for me to get it out instead of just kind of holding
And
on to
that's
it.
the distinction with the next episode. Exactly. That's right.
Okay,
This one
cool.
we've
Yeah.
talked a little bit about general again, but yeah, specifically about art, and I dare say specifically about music, which of course is an
Yeah.
interest of yours. Yes.
Yes, of
Yeah.
course.
That
All right.
that will be an interesting discussion, and I of course will have education where I'd like to
Yes.
talk a bit about education. I have alluded to this in a few articles and so
Mhm.
forth, but I think it's really time to talk about it a little bit more.
Okay, sure. All right, Zoe.
Zoe, thank you so
Yeah.
much. As of December 2025, a warrant is outstanding for the arrest of Zoe McClellan in relation to charges of kidnapping, child stealing, and child custody deprivation. McClellan is a public figure who has appeared in numerous popular television shows, including Star Trek Voyager, JAG, NCIS New Orleans, and Designated Survivor. Her face is familiar to millions. It is extraordinary that she has evaded detection for so long. McClellan was reportedly residing in an apartment in River Ridge, Louisiana in April 2021 and may still be residing in the area. McClellan grew up in the area of Port Orchard, Washington State, and may have returned to the area. Some sources believe that McClellan has left the United States and is residing in Canada or Costa Rica. Prior to disappearing, McClellan was known to use the alias Sarah Chandler. Anyone with any relevant information should contact the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. Thank you.
All right. Episode
See you
70
next
next
time.
time. Yeah, two
Episode
weeks.
70 next time.
All right, let's do it. Bye.
Bye.